On December 25, 1944, deep in the Ardennes forest, a German soldier looked through his binoculars and saw something he couldn't believe. The American troops across the line weren't just eating, they were feasting on roast turkey with cranberry sauce. The German soldier was eating a piece of hard bread and perhaps a slice of frozen horse meat. The American soldier was eating a meal that required a global refrigeration network to deliver. This contrast is the ultimate symbol of why the Axis powers lost the Second World War. It wasn't just about bigger tanks or faster planes. It was about the industrial capacity to weaponize Christmas. This is the story of the Turkey Lift of 1944, a logistical operation almost as complex as D-Day. It is a story of how the US Quartermaster Corps spent millions of dollars to deliver a hot meal to a cold foxhole. To understand the scale of this operation, we first have to look at the promise made by the Pentagon. In 1944, the US government guaranteed that every man and woman in uniform, no matter where they were, would get a traditional turkey dinner. This wasn't just a nice gesture, it was a calculated psychological weapon designed to maintain morale. But fulfilling that promise required commandeering the entire poultry industry of the United States. In early 1944, the Quartermaster Corps realized that there simply weren't enough turkeys in existence. The army needed millions of pounds of bird, but the civilian market was consuming them all. So the government issued War Food Order No. 106. This executive order effectively nationalized the turkey industry. It prohibited the sale of turkeys to civilians until the military had secured its quota. For months, it was illegal for an American housewife to buy a turkey because the army had drafted them all. But acquiring the birds was the easy part. The engineering nightmare was the cold chain. You cannot ship fresh meat across the Atlantic Ocean in 1944 without it rotting in the cargo hold. The US had to utilize a massive fleet of specialized reefer ships, refrigerated cargo vessels. These were floating freezers, heavily insulated and powered by massive compressor engines. The turkeys had to be slaughtered in the US, frozen rock hard, and loaded onto trains. Then they were transferred to the reefer ships, sailed through U-boat-infested waters, and unloaded in England and France. The temperature had to be maintained at exactly 10 degrees Fahrenheit and 12 Celsius for the entire journey. A single mechanical failure in the cooling system would mean tons of rotting meat and a logistical disaster. The total weight of the shipment was staggering. For the European theatre alone, the army shipped 20 million pounds of turkey. That is roughly 165,000 tons of specialized cargo, displacing space that could have been used for ammunition. This brings us to the opportunity cost of the Christmas dinner. Every ton of turkey meant one less ton of artillery shells or gasoline. In the middle of a fuel crisis, as we discussed in our previous video, the US chose to ship poultry. This decision drove logisticians crazy, but generals like Eisenhower supported it. They understood that a soldier who feels forgotten fights poorly. A soldier who feels valued fights hard. Once the turkeys arrived in Europe, the distribution problem began. The front line was moving. Units were scattered. There were no supermarkets in the Ardennes. The army used the Class A ration system, which meant fresh food prepared in field kitchens. But how do you cook a turkey in a muddy field while under artillery fire? The Quartermaster Corps had deployed the M1937 field range. This was a gasoline-powered stove that could bake, roast, and boil. It was a masterpiece of rugged engineering, capable of roasting 50 pounds of meat at a time. Cooks worked in shifts, 24 hours a day, roasting birds in the back of trucks or in bombed-out barns. But cooking the food was useless if you couldn't get it to the men in the foxholes. You cannot ask a soldier to walk back to the kitchen during a battle. This led to the widespread use of the Mermite Can. The Mermite Can was a vacuum-insulated container, essentially a giant military-grade thermos. It consisted of 3 inner metal inserts surrounded by an insulated steel shell. It could keep food hot for hours in freezing temperatures. Runners would strap these heavy cans to their backs and crawl through the snow to the forward positions. They delivered hot turkey, mashed potatoes, and gravy to men who were literally freezing to death. But in December 1944, the logistics collided with the German counteroffensive, the Battle of the Bulge. The Germans attacked right as the Christmas supply lines were being finalized. Thousands of tons of turkey were suddenly in danger of being captured by the Wehrmacht. There are reports of American units burning their supply dumps to prevent the Germans from getting the food. Imagine the economic waste. Millions of dollars of roasted turkey doused in gasoline and set on fire. In other sectors, the chaos of battle meant the food arrived, but the men were too busy fighting to eat. Or worse, the food arrived at a position that had been overrun an hour earlier. German troops, starving and scavenging, would stumble upon hot American meals sitting in abandoned bunkers. For a German soldier, finding a fresh turkey dinner was like finding an alien spacecraft. It proved that the enemy had resources they couldn't even dream of. The German army relied on goulash cannons, horse-drawn field kitchens that served watery soup. The idea that the Americans could ship cranberries across the ocean was demoralizing. It was a logistical flex, a demonstration of infinite wealth. But let's audit the menu itself. It wasn't just turkey. The menu included roast turkey, cranberry sauce, mashed potatoes, giblet gravy, and mincemeat pie. It also included candy, nuts, and cigarettes. The logistical footprint of the accessories is fascinating. Cranberries are not native to Europe. Every single berry had to be shipped from New England. This required tin for canning, sugar for processing, and shipping space. The sugar shortage in the US was partly due to the military's massive consumption for things like this. The cost of this single meal, when you factor in shipping, storage, and fuel, was astronomical. In modern dollars, the US military spent hundreds of millions just for one day of eating. Was it a waste? From a strictly kill-death ratio perspective, yes. Turkeys don't kill Nazis. Bullets do. But from a human capital perspective, it was a vital maintenance cost. The human machine needs psychological fuel just as much as a tank needs gasoline. There is a famous story of General Patton during this time. Patton was a hard-nosed pragmatist, but even he ensured his men got their turkey. However, the delivery was imperfect. In the Pacific Theater, the challenge was heat, not cold. Refrigeration was even more critical in the tropics to prevent food poisoning. Ships had to act as floating warehouses off the coast of islands like Leyte and Luzon. Sometimes the supply chain failed. Marines on the front lines often received turkey loaf, a canned, processed version of turkey that tasted like spam. They called it turd key. It was hated, but it was still protein. But for the millions who got the real thing, it was a moment of civilization in a world of barbarism. The logistics extended to the mail system as well. Christmas 1944 saw the peak of the V-mail system. V-mail, Victory Mail, was a logistical innovation to save weight on aircraft. Letters were written on special forms, photographed onto microfilm, flown across the ocean, and printed out at the destination. One sack of microfilm could hold 150,000 letters. This reduced the weight of mail bags from 2,500 pounds to just 45 pounds. This allowed the cargo planes to carry more turkey and ammunition instead of paper letters. The coordination between the food logistics and the mail logistics was a symphony of efficiency, but there is a dark irony to the Christmas of 1944. It was one of the bloodiest months of the war. While the trucks were delivering pies, the ambulances were driving back with casualties. Many soldiers ate their million-dollar dinner and were killed an hour later. The contrast between the festive food and the frozen corpses was surreal. It highlights the bizarre nature of industrial warfare. We can put a man on the moon or a turkey in a foxhole, but we cannot stop the killing. The Christmas truce of 1914, where soldiers stopped fighting to play soccer, did not happen in 1944. The industrial war had destroyed that kind of chivalry. There was no truce, only a pause to refuel the biological engines of the soldiers. After the meal, the Mermite cans were collected, cleaned, and the war resumed. The US economy absorbed the cost without blinking. Meanwhile, in Germany, the propaganda minister Goebbels tried to spin their lack of food as Spartan strength. He claimed that German soldiers were tougher because they didn't need luxury food. But every German soldier knew the truth. You can't fight on an empty stomach against an enemy who eats better than your general. The turkey lift also had a post-war impact on the American diet. Before the war, turkey was almost exclusively a holiday bird. But the military's massive investment in poultry farming expanded the industry permanently. Farmers who had ramped up production for the army needed a market after the war ended. This led to the marketing of turkey as a year-round meat in the US. The deli turkey sandwich you eat today is a direct descendant of the industrial ramp-up of 1944. So, when we analyze the logistics of Christmas, we are looking at the peak of American power. It was the ability to project a domestic holiday onto a global battlefield. It proved that the US supply chain was unbroken. It proved that the U-boats had failed to starve Britain or the army. The Atlantic was an American lake, a highway for food and steel. The 1944 Christmas dinner was the most expensive meal in history, not because of the ingredients, but because of the blood and treasure spent to deliver it. It was a meal served with a side of total air superiority. So the next time you see a picture of GIs eating turkey in the snow, don't just see a festive moment. See the reefer ships, the microfilmed letters, and the gasoline stoves. See the millions of dollars burnt to keep a tradition alive in hell. It was the ultimate flex of the military-industrial complex. We will kill you, but first we will eat pie.